Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome back. Let's just dig right into it. We're going to do a direct preview of Danny the Miracle Man Jacobs versus Saul Canelo Alvarez. Just break down the fight and the fighters, how we see it, and it's just an open preview to the fight. I'm sure there'll be many more breakdowns to come as we get closer and closer to officially if that fight actually gets made. Daniel Jacobs has a record of 35 wins, 2 losses, 29 knockouts, and he's been stopped once in his career. Danny Jacobs stands at 5 feet 11 and a half inches tall, has a 73-inch reach, and is 31 years old. And by contrast, Saul Canelo Alvarez has 51 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws with 35 knockouts. He stands at 5'8", and he has a 70.5-inch reach, and he's 28 years old. So clearly a few things that stick out is Danny Jacobs has the height and reach advantage, while Saul Canelo Alvarez has the youth and experience on his side. And yes, Daniel Jacobs is very experienced too. It's just that Saul Canelo Alvarez has been in with much better opposition than Daniel Jacobs consistently. The very best opposition that Danny Jacobs has been in with was Triple G, and Canelo Alvarez has been in there with him twice. He's been in there with Miguel Cotto, just everyone on that list. Iris Lara, Floyd Mayweather. He's been in with some of the biggest and best names throughout his career. And so it's always surprising when people say Canelo would duck anyone or is avoiding anyone, when clearly he fights the best time and time again. Now, if you look at this fight and break it down, the way I see this fight going out and unfolding is that I think that Daniel Jacobs is going to look to box early, or he may stand toe-to-toe with Canelo Alvarez because he thinks that Canelo Alvarez, being the smaller man, would be a guy you stand toe-to-toe with. But if he's wise, he won't do that. And the reason why I'll say this is, if you look at Canelo Alvarez, his body punching, even the punching that he had to the body of Triple G, consistently moved him back. You've seen Danny Jacobs visibly hurt in certain areas against a big puncher like Triple G, so you know that's going to be a challenge for him to take Canelo's shots. And the same with Canelo. Danny Jacobs is a very hard puncher, and he gave Triple G hell as well. So both of these guys have that common opponent in Triple G, and it just kind of shows you that both of these guys have top-level power. It's just the experience goes to Canelo. The reach goes to Danny Jacobs. I'll give Canelo Alvarez the speed as well. Canelo Alvarez is, I would say, a slightly more better boxer than Danny Jacobs, for the simple fact that he's shown more versatility against different fighters. I haven't seen as much from Danny Jacobs. As of recently, I've seen Danny Jacobs get hit a lot in his most recent fights. But then again, when you go against top-level competition again and again, there's going to be those moments where you get hit a little bit too much. Sergey Deverenchenko, people underrate that win. I think that's a very good win against a very difficult opponent, especially an opponent who knows you in and out. Against Manchai Sulecki, he was basically an undefeated fighter, and that was a very difficult fight at certain points for Danny Jacobs. He dropped him in the 12th round. Sulecki basically beat the guy, stopped the guy, and Hugo Centeno Jr., that Jermell Charlo had fought. So that was a very interesting tidbit in there. So if you look at Daniel Jacobs' overall record, he's beaten 3 undefeated fighters in a row, starting with Luis Arias, who was 18-0, then Manchai Sulecki, who was 26-0, and Sergey Deverenchenko, who was 12-0. And all 3 of these guys are rated fairly decent. They're good opponents, and I think Sergey Deverenchenko is a very difficult opponent. Some people say he ducked Triple G because he didn't want to enter into a difficult fight. And I'll say, I don't know if I would use the word duck, but I will say he did intentionally avoid him, for the simple fact that if he were to enter a fight with a Sergey Deverenchenko, who's a very strong and elite level power puncher, that would be a very difficult fight for him, especially going into a Canelo Alvarez fight. So I can understand why Triple G wouldn't want to do that right away, and that's why he gave up the belt. Why risk everything for a guy who's not going to be a huge payday, who you're not going to get any belts off of? It just wasn't worth it at the time. Now, I do believe Triple G would fight him, but that's besides the point. I think Daniel Jacobs has a very stellar resume when it comes to fighting undefeated fighters most recently, and he's looking to fight the best. He's called out Jermall Charlo. He's calling out the guys trying to make the best fights, and he's also stated that if he doesn't get Canelo right away, he'll look to fight Triple G in a rematch, which I thought was very close, and depending on how you saw it, could technically actually go either way. Now, when you look at Canelo Alvarez and his last few opponents, Rocky Fielding, Gennady Golovkin twice, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., I think Canelo Alvarez has consistently improved over his last 3-4 fights. I think that people don't give him credit for the Amir Khan fight, when you can easily say that Canelo Alvarez was getting outboxed at the majority of the beginning of that fight before Canelo stopped him. And people just think that, oh, Canelo just mindlessly stopped Amir Khan. He didn't mindlessly stop him. He timed him, and that's a boxing skill, and a lot of people don't give him credit. Canelo Alvarez allowed Amir Khan to get off at certain points in that fight because he wanted to time him and hit him with a good shot that he knew would eventually put him down. These are against fighters that don't get the credit that he deserves. Now, I'm not saying Amir Khan's elite level fighter. He has elite level boxing ability. He just has a very poor chin. But you can't be mad at Canelo Alvarez for exploiting that, getting another good name on his resume, and moving on. And so ultimately, when I look at both of these guys, so Canelo Alvarez and Danny Jacobs, I look at these guys as two top-level fighters. I'll still rate Canelo Alvarez as the best fighter at 160 pounds. I'll rate right under that. I'll rate Danny Jacobs. So then I'll do Canelo Alvarez, Danny Jacobs, and after Danny Jacobs, I'll insert Triple G, Demetrius Andre. And then at that point, as far as one of the best prospects, I'll put in Jermall Charlo. I'll give Jermall Charlo the credit, but we just need a signature win. Now, when I look at the breakdown of the middleweight division, and I look at the way, Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez are sitting at the top, because these guys have the best wins at 160. They fought the best competition, and they're both world champions, so they have to be at the top of that pecking order. I think that fight's going to be a chess match. Ultimately, I think the fight starts out. Hopefully, Danny Jacobs is smart and tries to box Canelo, but eventually it's going to turn into a war. These guys are going to go toe-to-toe, and I'm not actually going to be surprised if I see Danny Jacobs get dropped in this fight. I think it's a 50-50 fight. I think it's a close fight. I think Danny Jacobs could beat Canelo Alvarez. But on the reverse end, I could see Canelo beating Danny Jacobs as well. And it's because there's a little lingering doubt that Danny Jacobs could get hurt. I saw him slightly visibly hurt against Sergey Derevyanchenko, and we know he's been stopped before. Although I don't really count that stoppage against him. I think it's a close fight. I think Danny could win. But at the same time, I've never seen Canelo Alvarez in that position. I know that he has a granite chin. He's taken Triple G's best shots and didn't fold. So when I look at it like that, I wonder, is it going to come down to someone getting dropped and a point being taken off? Is it going to be something that small that decides this fight? Because this fight could easily be a draw. It could easily go one way or the other. But I don't really anticipate a knockout for either guy. I think it'll be a very close chess match. And I think it'll be one of the best fights we've ever seen as far as Canelo and Danny Jacobs. I think that's truly the best fighting the best. I know a lot of people want to see the Jermall Charlo versus Canelo. I do too. And people typically want to see that, to shut mouths of, fanboys and things like that. But the pure best fight against the best two elite competitors in the middleweight division has to be Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez. I think that's a 50-50 fight, and it legitimately could go either way. Once again, it's the IBFP. Please share, like, and you must absolutely subscribe.